Hello, good people. It's the Big Happy here, and today I'm talking to you about Harvest Host. I will not be talking to you about Harvest Hats. I was out playing in the woods today and having a particularly ineffective hair day, so thought I'd spare you the disheveled appearance and instead just rock my cap here. And this is certainly not the first video about Harvest Host, but I think the ones that are out there miss a few important things. First of all, this is being recorded in early 2025. And Harvest Host has acquired one of their larger competitors, which is a company called Boondocking Welcome. So they've kind of consolidated those services, although they're slightly different, and I'll cover those differences and nuances. And also, I think a lot of the reviews kind of do you, the viewer, a bit of a disservice in that they talk about Harvest Host, what it entails, how it works, and all that great stuff. But they don't focus on perhaps the most important part, which is I think that there's a distinct type of person or way that you may or may not camp that makes Harvest Host either a great deal and a super effective addition to your camping process and kind of your camping planning, or it makes it a total waste of money. And it's not necessarily the service or what it offers, but it's kind of how you camp and how you might use these services that will drive whether this is something great that makes a lot of sense for you, or whether this is something that you're going to subscribe to, never use, and kind of end up frustrated after a year or so. And this is a subscription service. I'm not sponsored by Harvest Host or any of its kind of subsidiary brands. I don't have any magic codes to give you, but I will say if you are thinking about this service and you do end up thinking that it's a good idea, spend 14 seconds on the Google machine and you will find some discount codes. If you're getting, I would say, less than like 15% off kind of the published price, then keep searching, because the company will regularly offer 20 to 30% sales, depending on the year. Obviously, if you're in prime camping season, you may not see deals that extreme, but there's at least 10 to 20% codes floating around there all the time. So let's jump in and start with what exactly is Harvest Host. And kind of the lazy explanation that I was given when I first started looking into this is it's like an Airbnb for RV sites, in that you're using a service. Harvest Host kind of runs this booking tool that you can get on your phone or use on your computer in the guise of a website. And they ultimately help you find a place where you can park your RV that's not quite equivalent to a campsite, but we'll get into that a little bit. I think that's actually not a great way to look at it. Airbnb is again, a service that's letting you use somebody else's place as a hotel. I think the nuance with Harvest Host is it's letting you kind of park your RV on somebody else's property. It's not necessarily an equivalent for a campsite. What I mean by that is generally most of the sites on Harvest Host don't have electrical hookups, they don't have water, very rarely do they have sewer. And you're ultimately kind of using somebody else's property as a parking space versus, getting a privately owned, quasi non-commercial campsite. And that's opposed to one of Harvest Host's existing competitors, which is a company called HipCamp. That's more like an Airbnb type service where you're getting somebody that's set up, kind of a quasi RV campsite in their, backyard, on property they own, on their farm, on their ranch, or whatever. Instead, I think of Harvest Host as a directory of places where you can park an RV. And those places fall into three buckets, and those kind of match the three tiers of the Harvest Host subscription that you can get. And kind of the baseline subscription that was the traditional Harvest Host offering that you usually hear people talk about is allowing you to park your RV or whatever vehicle you have in a small business's parking lot. And those small businesses range from things like breweries to farms to restaurants, even some RV-related services. I think there's an RV shop somewhere in New England where you can use them as a Harvest Host and park overnight. And the deal is basically that by virtue of being able to park at these small businesses for free, you kind of engage in a gentleman's agreement to spend, I think their guideline is like 20 to 40 bucks at that small business. There's no submitting receipts. There's no kind of proving that you've spent that money. It's all kind of based on the honor system. And so ultimately, a typical scenario for us, and I'll give you a real example, is we were driving from our home to New Hampshire, and we needed a midpoint to stop at in our RV. We found a farm/distillery in New York State that was about 10, 15 minutes off the highway. We roll in there, you kind of walk in and say to the person, "Hey, I'm here with Harvest Host." That will either result in somebody giving you a totally confused look and have to go get the manager, or call the owner, or seek some sort of authority because they don't know what the hell you're talking about. Or it will result in somebody, which in this case was the scenario went down, saying, "Oh yeah, you kind of go back in this area or here's the place to park, or in maybe 20% of the cases they'll have a nice little sign that says Harvest Host. And at that point you basically roll your RV trailer, pop-up, pickup, whatever you have, whatever your setup is, into the designated spot. You can kind of deploy your slides. In most cases, if you have that feature, you can kind of get yourself set up. Again, there's no water, electrical, or sewer in, I would say, 100% of the cases where I've used it, probably 98% of the cases typically. And once you're set up, you roll in and you generally use the services of the business. In this case, I was with my entire family. We're the type that likes to maybe rock a beer after a day on the road, have something to eat. So being in this place that was a distillery, that had a food truck, that had some local beers on tap, worked out quite well. It was this beautiful farm setting. We had a perfect night, really nice sunset. They had Adirondack chairs and campfires and all this stuff. So we did something we do anyway, which was, rock a few drinks, rock some food, and then we got to sleep in our RV and kind of carry on our journey in the morning. And then I would say is probably scenario number one, where you might really like Harvest Host, or if you don't travel like this, you might never like it. And that's when you're going kind of from point to point and need a stopover along the way. And it's a stopover that you would kind of entail the things you usually do. Again, for us, we needed that stopover along the 1,000-ish mile journey between our home and that New England destination we were headed towards. So this was kind of in the right spot geographically. We're probably going to have a beer or two, at the end of a day of driving. So that's something we do anyway. We're going to have dinner, which is something we do anyway. So it's kind of, we've essentially got a place to park for the night for free, relatively close to the highway. And I'll talk more about kind of your boondocking / dry camping setup. But that actually, I think in this scenario is a benefit. You're not connecting things. You're not doing a whole bunch of stuff in the morning. Basically, we were totally self-contained. We did our thing, woke up, I think a couple of us showered, we had some breakfast, and we were off on the road without having to goof around or anything like that. The second bucket of the Harvest Host service, which used to be a separate company, is Boondockers Welcome. And it's a little bit weird, but you can go on the website and kind of see the different subscription tiers to Harvest Host. And, there's 3 tiers, at least as of the time I'm recording this. They, cost progressively more money. There's that baseline Harvest Host, which again is the small businesses. That's the breweries, distilleries, farms. I'll talk some more examples in a few minutes. Then you add the Boondockers Welcome tier, which is essentially you're staying at somebody's house. And that could be everything from somebody that says, hey, park in front of my house on the street, and you're literally parking on the street, and I guess using municipal parking and kind of hoping that person checked and made sure they were on the up and up with allowing you to do that. 2, in some cases, and I haven't experienced this, but I've heard of people that have done this, you're parking on somebody's property where they have lots of acreage, maybe they have a nice little spot set up for RVs. They may even have, electrical and water and some basic hookups that are either free or you have to pay for, but you're kind of, out in this, beautiful open area on somebody's massive property. I haven't used the Boondockers Welcome feature as much, but in this case, there's no expectation of money changing hands. Obviously, you're not going to pay that person off, although, in some cases they will ask for money for services like electrical or water hookups. But there is an expectation that you might chat with that person. Generally, these are people that are RVers themselves, or travelers, or people that like meeting people that are on some kind of adventure or journey. So the expectation is, that person may or may not, give you a little tappy tap on the door in the evening and just introduce themselves, ask about your journey, that sort of thing. So if you're kind of a private person and don't want to deal with other people, that may seem like more of a burden than a benefit. If you're somebody that's kind of on an adventure and not exactly, planned down to the minute and punching a clock along the way, that may be a lot of fun to talk to somebody that's met some other travelers, maybe has some good stories to share and that sort of thing. The third tier of Harvest Host, which I've paid for but never used because it sounds really good in theory, but I just haven't come across an opportunity to use it yet, is you get access to golf courses. And this to me sounded really bizarre initially, but when I thought about it, actually sounds like kind of a cool idea, since golf courses are generally in sort of a wide open space. It's pretty rolling hills and manicured lawns and all that stuff. And they're a giant chunk of property that's probably not used much in the middle of the night. So in theory, with the golf course subscription, you can sign up, you can go and overnight at a golf course and park wherever they tell you to park. I think they do have some option where you can play around either at some discounted rate or full fare. I'm not a golfer. I find the game a bit frustrating, but I did sign up for that option and just haven't had a chance to use it yet. So the way we've typically used Harvest Host is kind of one of three different options. And I gave you the first one, and that's kind of that stopover when you're on either a long point-to-point journey. So we were kind of getting from our home to somebody else's home, need that stopover overnight, and then we're kind of carrying on to a destination. And in that case, it kind of replaces a hotel. If we were doing the same trip, which we've done, a few dozen times just in our car and not in the RV, we'd probably stop at a, moderately priced hotel along the way. We'd look for something that's in a small town, so there's something to do. And we'd end up trying to go to a local restaurant, have a beer or two, get to bed early, and then hit the road in the morning. So that scenario with Harvest Host works really well for us. And that example I gave you of that farm in New York, I think we probably spent $150 all in for our family of 5 between feeding everyone, my wife and I having a couple or 3 drinks, and then heading on our merry way. That's money we would have spent anyway. So if you don't do a lot of those point-to-point journeys in your RV, or we've used that similar approach when kind of we're taking a sort of multi-stop adventure, where maybe we're staying at a formal park, either a state or national park for a couple or 3 days, and then we need a stopover between parks. Similar scenario kind of works out very well. You may not find that useful if you don't do that type of traveling. Also, you may not find that useful if you're not somebody that wants to go and have a few beers, or somebody where spending $40 on a food truck and some fancy microbrew or something like that is not something you want to do. And I'll certainly acknowledge that I'm in a position where doing that is something that's within my means, and I understand that that's not within everybody else's means. And if you're not someone that likes to drink beer or something like that, there are other options, but they're all kind of nichey. So another example I'll give you is we stopped at a place that billed itself as a blueberry farm. Again, very nice setting, kind of in this small town, right near this very nice waterfront preserve with walking trails and all that stuff. But it was a blueberry farm / small engine repair place. So, 7, 8 in the morning when they're getting up anyway, they were ripping lawnmowers and chainsaws and fixing them up. And, the kind of blueberry farm was basically a little counter where we bought some blueberry muffins and some overpriced blueberry jam. Again, I don't mind supporting a small business, and spending $7, $8 for a jar of blueberry jam, which is something I'll use anyway, was extravagant, but felt like it was a worthwhile deal for being able to have a good stopover point at night. But that's kind of the deal. And if you do travel like this, but that idea of buying jams or alpaca socks or microbrews or whatever doesn't appeal to you, the general replacement for this, which is free and doesn't require any sort of fancy service, is something like Cracker Barrel, where they'll let you stay in their parking lots overnight at most locations. They're right off the highway in most cases, so kind of easy on, easy off. They're spread all over at least the East Coast and the places I've kind of driven around. So there are other options there if you don't like that idea of kind of having to spend that money in addition to the Harvest Host fee you've already paid to get that kind of quick stopover point. The second way we've used Harvest Host and found to be pretty interesting and effective is in contrast to most campgrounds and state or national or regional parks. Generally, those want to be outside of a major city. If I'm going to commune with nature and I want to spend 3 or 4 days fishing or goofing around with a paddleboard or hiking or whatnot, I want to be as far away from civilization as possible. Ideally, maybe there's a gas station and a grocery store within half an hour, but I don't want to be in kind of suburban or semi-urban sprawl. But with Harvest Host, by virtue of the fact that a lot of their places to stay are smaller businesses, they're kind of in some cases, the center of a small or sort of mid-sized town, or they're on the outskirts. So if you think of something like a brewery, distillery, gift shop type of thing, they're generally going to be relatively close to civilization. So if part of the way you use your RV or trailer or whatnot is to go and stay in a place, kind of explore sort of an urban environment and do that sort of thing, and maybe have a meal, have a beer, buy some jam or whatever along the way, then Harvest Host can be pretty effective. We used that on a trip to Canada where we stayed outside of, I think it's Londonburg or Lundberg, Nova Scotia, which is this beautiful UNESCO heritage town, all this stuff. Really neat buildings. There's some kind of fishing museum downtown, all sorts of neat stuff to see. And no campgrounds within easy walking distance of the town. But there was a Harvest Host brewery / restaurant right on the water. Probably one of the most beautiful places I've woken up in our RV, where you pulled open the curtain and we're looking over this UNESCO World Heritage Harbor and all this nonsense. But it was also within walking distance to the town. So we had a place to park. We used it as kind of a stopover between more nature-focused destinations along this longer trip. We were able to walk into town. We had a place to get dinner kind of picked out. And that worked out really well. We've done something similar after taking a ferry ride from our Nova Scotia trip into Maine. There's a Harvest Host in Freeport that was at some little restaurant that had a laundromat next to it. So we were able to get a bite to eat, get some laundry done, and then walk right into town and goof around and explore. And then kind of the final third way we used Harvest Host and found it to be pretty enjoyable is using it as sort of a date night. And what I mean by that is you can go in the Harvest Host directory. The app has a little map. I'd love to put a screenshot on here, but you're not supposed to show anyone the map. You can go on their website and kind of see a generalized version, get an idea of where there's places. But most places I've looked, there's been venues around within 30 to 60 minutes of wherever I've kind of been hanging my hat for that night. And in our case, near our home, there's probably 4 or 5 reasonably interesting Harvest Hosts within an hour's drive. So occasionally we'll go and pull the RV out of storage. We'll go and park in some area, ideally something that's close to one of these smaller towns within a short drive of our house. We'll go, we'll walk around, we'll have dinner in the town, we'll spend the 20 to 30 bucks in whatever venue is hosting us for the night. We'll have a good time, and then you can kind of crash in the RV. So saves you the cost of a hotel, kind of gets you out of the house for a night, lets us explore some places we maybe otherwise wouldn't have gone to. And it's kind of a fun, cheap date. If it's dinner and a drink or two, which is something we might do anyway, you throw in the adventure of wheeling out the RV, staying overnight in somewhere funky, waking up in a farm or a small town or someplace that, is kind of near you, but you've never had an excuse to visit. That makes it kind of fun. And it's, obviously not something I would do without having subscribed to Harvest Host, but it's sort of a way to get a little more benefit out of the service. So hopefully you've either seen yourself in one of those 3 scenarios and said, hey, that's really cool, I'd like to do that. Or you've said, those are the 3 dumbest things I've ever heard, I have no interest in that. And that hopefully helps you make a decision about Harvest Host one way or the other. The thing I will say is it's not very useful as a destination outside of that date night scenario, since you are limited generally to 1 or 2 nights at a specific venue. And at the end of the day, you're staying in a parking lot at somebody's home or at some small business. It's not like a campground where you might want to spend a week there and you're kind of walking around or playing in the trails or jumping in the lake or something like that. You're generally not somewhere where you want to spend a couple or 3 days. And the expectation is also that you're going to pick up stake and move on the next day so somebody else can stay there. The other thing that's important to understand is, for the most part, Harvest Host and Boondockers Welcome and the golf courses are focused on what the RV community calls dry camping or boondocking. And if you're not sure what that means, it basically means places without any hookups. So you're going to roll in there, there's no water, there's no electrical, and there's no sewer. Now, there are some exceptions. Sometimes a Harvest Host will allow you to pay and get an electrical hookup. For the most part, those electrical hookups are, run an extension cord to some outdoor outlet. So you're getting, 15 amp service. You're generally not going to get a hookup for your, 50 amp, super cool, giant trailer. If there's water offered, it's generally a garden hose hooked up outside or something, so you could fill up your water tank. And I haven't really seen sewer offered anywhere except on a few of the Boondockers Welcome type sites, and there's an extra fee for that. So you're going to need to be able to provide your own electricity, your own water, and keep yourself cool or hot appropriately for the 24 hours where you're staying at one of those sites. In our case, our RV is pretty well set up for that type of activity. We've got solar, we've got lithium-ion batteries, so we can live pretty comfortably off the grid for about 36 to 48 hours, depending on how miserly we are with our electrical usage. We've got a 40-gallon water tank, we've got 40 gallons of black and gray storage. So we can go and stay somewhere, we can cook, we can run the fan, we can be comfortable, we can brew coffee in the morning and kind of pack up, and then we'll dump our tanks somewhere. Things like Love's truck stops, some of the state rest areas will have places where you can dump your sewer. So, we'll do our thing and either dump our tanks and fill up and charge up and do all that stuff at the next campsite we go to, or if it's kind of the last stop before we head home, we have a place near our house that's a truck stop where you can dump tanks and do all that stuff. So if your RV has limited electrical capacity, if you don't have the ability to store water on board or anything like that, that's something you might want to think of. And that's something that could make a Harvest Host stop a little less effective. You're also not going to get a full power electrical hookup. So even though we're pretty well set up for boondocking, we're not able to run the AC. We can run heat since we have a propane heater, but if it was 100 degrees and humid outside, our air conditioning system in that scenario is windows open and a fan or two, which may or may not be very comfortable. So overall, our family really likes Harvest Host. We probably use it most in that, point to point stopover capacity, or we'll integrate it if we're doing kind of a long, multi-day, multi-stop adventure where for example, this last summer, I took 2 weeks and rolled through Nova Scotia with the kids. I think we stayed at 5 or 6 different provincial and regional parks along the way. But having that ability to stop over to Harvest Host for kind of an overnight was great. Also, Harvest Host will have some kind of offbeat little museums. They'll have churches. They'll have some funky things. It's not just breweries and alpaca farms and that sort of thing. So on that trip, for example, we stayed at the Miners Museum, which was dedicated to coal mining. It was in one of the largest coal mines in North America, I guess. At least that's how they build it. And basically, the Harvest Host was go park in the parking lot of this museum, which just happened to be right on the ocean. So this beautiful view, a few little places you could walk around and kind of look at the cliffs and the water. And then we got to go and cheer from coal miners and put on hard hats and literally go down into this coal mine and check it out. And then waltz out, and 100 feet from the exit was our RV, and I went to bed for the night and got up in the morning, cooked our pancakes, and we're back on the road. So if that sounds like a really cool addition to how you camp and how you use your RV, great, well worth it. Again, look for those 15+% off deals on Harvest Hosts. I haven't used the Boondockers welcome feature very much. I haven't used the golf course feature at all. So, maybe start with just kind of the base package if this is interesting to you and see how you like it. If that sounds really unappealing, maybe your RV is not set up for boondocking, or maybe, you typically, the way you camp is you go to a park for a week, you do your thing, and then you go back and put your RV away. You don't have those stopovers. You're not doing these kind of multi-destination circle or back and forth type routes. I wouldn't see a lot of use for Harvest Host in that case. So sit down and have a good think about, how do I camp? How might I use this thing? Would it replace Cracker Barrel stopovers for me? Would it make my longer drives more awesome if I knew I had a ice cold beer at the end, or a fresh pair of alpaca socks? For some reason, they seem to have a lot of alpaca farms in Harvest Host. Or maybe just like stopping at offbeat places and chatting with folks about their adventures, in which case that Boondockers welcome feature might make a lot of sense. But don't just take somebody's word for it that's jawing on the internet. Think of how you might use it. Think about some of those scenarios I gave you, and if that fits into how you use it, I think you'd enjoy it quite a bit. And regardless of what you do, hope you get out for many adventures and spend less time on the YouTubes and more time on the open road, having fun with yourself or your loved ones. And as always, this is a Big Heavy wishing you happy trails wherever your travels take you, and better hair days than what I am undergoing at the moment. Peace.